She spent 15 years being invisible. Tonight, she reminded the entire world exactly who she was. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, someone who looked right through you like you were furniture, like you were decoration, like you were nothing but a name on a document they'd already stopped reading, then you already know how this story ends, but you don't know what it cost her to get there. You don't know what she buried. You don't know what she built in the dark, alone, while her husband stood in the spotlight taking credit for a world she quietly held together with both hands. Stay until the end. Like this video, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The car that arrived at the Connecticut estate at 6:40 in the morning was not the kind of car that made noise. No chrome, no vanity plates, no driver who talked. It was a matte black sedan with tinted windows and a government-issue weight to its silence, the kind of vehicle that belonged to people who had long since stopped needing to announce themselves. It pulled through the iron gate without buzzing the intercom, because the gate recognized it, because the gate had always recognized it. Vivienne Moreau was already awake. She had been awake since 4, which was not unusual. She slept the way animals sleep when they know something is coming, lightly, on the surface, one eye always reading the dark. The estate was 43 rooms, and she occupied maybe 6 of them regularly. The rest were maintained, dusted, kept in a state of permanent readiness for a life that looked fuller than it was. She had stopped noticing the emptiness a long time ago. Or rather, she had taught herself to stop noticing it, which was a different thing entirely. She was in the greenhouse when the car arrived. The greenhouse was the one space in the 43-room estate that was entirely hers. Damien had built it for her in the 3rd year of their marriage, back when he still did things like that. Gestures that cost money instead of effort, which was always the way with men like him. But she had taken it and made it into something he never intended. Rows of climbing roses along the south-facing glass, orchids under precise humidity control, a corner of herbs she actually used in cooking, though the estate's professional chef had stopped asking her to stay out of his kitchen after she proved, quietly and without confrontation, that she knew more than he did. She was pruning a climbing rose, a blaze variety, deep red, thorny and stubborn as anything she'd ever loved, when she heard the car on the gravel. She did not turn around. She finished the cut she was making, clean and precise, just above the 3rd node from the base, the way you had to do it if you wanted the plant to redirect its energy rather than waste it. Then she set down the shears, stripped her garden gloves, and walked out to meet Adrian Mercer. He was standing at the greenhouse door, which meant he hadn't wanted to disturb her inside. That was Adrian. He had worked for her for 11 years, and he still did things like that, small courtesies that cost him nothing and told her everything about the kind of man he was. He was 52, compact, gray at the temples, with eyes that were always slightly tired because he was always working. He held a leather portfolio in his left hand and his phone in his right, and his expression was the expression he only used when something had already happened and couldn't be undone. "Tell me," Vivienne said. He handed her the phone first. On the screen was a single notification, automated, clinical, the kind of message a system generates without human review. Her name had been removed from the guest list for the Moreau Syndicate Mafia annual charity gala. Access revoked. The system had sent the notification to all previously confirmed attendees upon status change. She read it once, then she handed the phone back. "When was the change made?" "Last Thursday," Adrian said. Manually overridden by Damien's chief aide, Marcus Webb. The cover instruction was a routine list reduction, the official capacity rationale. But the list wasn't reduced. Your slot was given to a guest Damien added the same evening. Vivienne was quiet. She looked past Adrian toward the main house, which sat broad and gray and solid against the pale October morning sky. 43 rooms, a marriage that had lasted 15 years. A man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that she was scenery. "Who is she?" "Celeste Arnaud, socialite, French-American, 31. She's been photographed with Damien 4 times in the past 3 months, always described as a business associate of the syndicate." He paused. "She is not." "No," Vivienne agreed. "She isn't." She started walking toward the main house. Adrian fell in beside her without being asked, because that was how they worked. He matched her pace, which was not slow. Even in garden clothes, dark trousers, a simple linen shirt, her dark hair pulled back without ceremony. Vivienne Moreau moved like someone who had somewhere to be. "The gala is tonight," she said. "Yes." "He expects me to stay home. He believes you don't know about the list change. The system notification was supposed to go to a secondary account that Marcus manages. It was routed incorrectly." Adrian allowed himself a fraction of something that wasn't quite a smile. "Human error." "Convenient," she said. She pushed through the kitchen door, and the professional chef, whose name was Thomas and who had learned 3 years ago to simply work around her, moved aside without a word. She went to the counter where the coffee was already made. Thomas had learned that too, and poured herself a cup. She did not offer Adrian one, not because she was rude, but because they both knew he'd already had 3, and they both knew she knew that. She stood at the kitchen counter and drank her coffee and thought. It was, Adrian had privately observed over 11 years, the most dangerous thing he had ever seen anyone do. When Vivienne Moreau stood still and thought, entire markets shifted. Entire organizations changed direction. Entire futures were quietly, methodically rewritten. Has he moved any of the Gala's financial architecture through syndicate accounts? The catering, venue security, and primary entertainment contracts, yes. The VIP coordination and off-book investment forums are all routed through Eclipse Holdings, the same as always. He doesn't know that. He's never known that. And the Kastner acquisition? Still unresolved. Damien's team submitted their final offer Tuesday. The Kastner board hasn't responded. Adrian opened the portfolio. Our offer went in Wednesday through the Cayman Blind Trust as planned. We're higher and we're cleaner. They're deciding tonight. She set down the coffee cup. Then tonight is the right time, she said. Adrian looked at her carefully. He had always been careful with her, not from fear exactly, but from a kind of deep professional respect that bordered on awe, though he would never have used that word out loud. "The directive you prepared last year, the one you told me to hold." "Activate it." He nodded once. No questions. No pushback. 11 years, and he knew better than to ask her if she was sure, because she was always sure. She made decisions the way surgeons made incisions, after every possible factor had been weighed, and not 1 second before. She went upstairs to dress. Damien Moreau did not live at the Connecticut estate during the week. He kept a penthouse in Midtown that cost him $4 million a year in maintenance alone, because Damien had understood from the age of 19 that the only difference between a man who inspired fear and a man who inspired respect was the quality of the surfaces around him. He had spent 30 years acquiring surfaces. He was at the penthouse Thursday morning when Marcus Webb brought him his coffee and his calendar and his problems in that order. Marcus was 38, built like a former collegiate wrestler gone slightly soft around the middle, and intensely loyal in the way that men who owe their careers to a single patron tend to be loyal, completely, and with a hairline fracture of resentment running through it that nobody ever examined. He had been with Damien 12 years, and Damien trusted him the way a man trusts a good vehicle, functionally, without sentiment. "Gala confirmation numbers?" Damien asked, not looking up from his phone. "Confirmed 212. Declined or unresponsive 17. The Hargrove family is bringing their lawyer, which could be a problem depending on what Hargrove wants to negotiate." "Hargrove always brings his lawyer. It's a status performance. Seat him near the bar and let him perform." Damien set his phone down and looked at Marcus. "The list is clean?" Marcus held his expression steady. "Clean. Vivienne's access? Revoked Thursday. She hasn't called, hasn't mentioned it. Far as I can tell, she doesn't know." Damien picked up his coffee. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Midtown spread out below him in the thin morning light, all glass and commerce and organized pressure. He had loved this city since he was a boy from New Orleans, who arrived with $40 and a last name that meant nothing here yet. He had built it into something. He had made the Moreau name mean something so specific that people used it in certain rooms the way they use the names of weather systems. With caution, and from a distance, he thought about Vivienne the way he occasionally thought about a piece of furniture he'd had for a long time. With something between fondness and practical assessment. She was elegant. She had always been elegant. In the early years, that elegance had been electric to him. A woman who understood exactly how to exist in any room without demanding the room. But the world he occupied now required a different kind of presence. Something sharper. Something that matched the image he was building. Celeste confirmed? "She'll be at the hotel by 7. Car picks her up at 7:30. Damien nodded. He did not feel guilty, which he recognized with the clarity of a man who has spent decades not feeling guilty about the choices required to maintain his position. He would deal with Vivian afterward, quietly, privately, with the finality that all long overdue things deserved. Tonight was about the Kastner acquisition, about the Hargrove alliance, about the 3 South American financial partnerships that had been in quiet negotiation for 8 months. Tonight was about the future of the syndicate, and in that future, he had decided he needed a partner who reflected what the syndicate was now, not what it had been 15 years ago. He showered, dressed in the suit his tailor had delivered Tuesday, charcoal, with the particular weight of fabric that communicated wealth without announcing it, and arrived at the hotel by 6:15. The ballroom of the Whitaker Hotel was, by design, the most powerful room in the city for exactly one night each year. The Moreau Syndicate Charity Gala existed nominally to support a children's hospital foundation that received approximately 4% of the event's proceeds. The remaining money moved through 11 different channels and financed operations that would have made the charity's board of directors physically ill. The gala's actual function was architecture. It was the annual assembly of every significant player in both the syndicate's criminal infrastructure and its legitimate financial superstructure, gathered in one room with champagne and orchestral music, and the carefully cultivated fiction that they were all simply successful people enjoying a charitable evening. Damien moved through the pre-event reception like a man who owned the air in the room, which, functionally, he did. He shook hands with Senator Aldridge from the Connecticut delegation, who looked at Damien the way men look at things they need and despise in equal measure. He spoke briefly with Julius Hargrove, who arrived without his lawyer after all, which was itself a message Damien filed away. He greeted Matthias Vance, who ran the syndicate's financial laundering operation through a real estate development company in Jersey City, and Victor Wren, whose import business moved 70% legitimate cargo and 30% cargo that required a different kind of documentation. He did not think about Vivian. He had placed Celeste at his left, close enough to communicate partnership without yet making a formal announcement. She was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, who understand beauty as a professional tool, deliberately, strategically, with a warmth that turned on and off like a light switch. She leaned toward him during cocktails and said something that made him laugh, and 2 people nearby noticed him laughing, which was the point. The first signal that something was wrong came at 8:17. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about the first signal, Sasuri. It never was. It was simply a shift in the room's attention, not toward Damien, sideways, toward the entrance corridor where security had, without announcement, quietly formed a different configuration. Damien noticed it because he had spent 30 years reading rooms the way other men read financial statements. Not for what they said, but for what they didn't. "What's happening at the door?" he said quietly to Marcus, who materialized at his elbow. "I'm not sure." Security flagged a VIP arrival. Unscheduled. Unscheduled. Damien turned his head fractionally. "Who cleared it?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." He would determine it too late. He would determine it, in fact, precisely in time to understand that the determination was irrelevant. The room did something rooms rarely do in Damien's experience. It quieted. Not the anxious quiet of a threat, not the sharp quiet of a confrontation, the specific quiet of recognition. The silence a room makes when it understands that someone significant has arrived and is trying to calibrate exactly how significant. Damien watched Senator Aldridge's expression change first. The senator was looking toward the entrance corridor with an expression Damien had never seen him wear in Damien's presence. Open, almost eager, the expression of a man who was suddenly, involuntarily impressed. Julius Hargrove turned. Victor Wren actually set his drink down. Matthias Vance, who Damien had worked with for 9 years and who displayed approximately the emotional range of a parking meter, blinked. Damien turned towards the entrance. She was in dark blue. That was the first thing he registered, and the registration was purely physical. Dark blue, the specific shade that people who know color call midnight, a gown that was neither flashy nor understated, but simply correct in the way that a perfectly balanced sentence is correct. Her dark hair was up simply in the way it used to be when she was 28 and they were new to each other, and she would do it without a mirror, by instinct, and it would look like that. Her posture was what his mother would have called carriage, that quality of inhabiting vertical space without apology. He knew her posture like he knew his own heartbeat. He had known it for 15 years. She walked into the ballroom of the Whitaker Hotel at 8:19 on a Friday evening in October. And the first man who moved toward her was Senator Aldridge, who crossed the room with a speed that told Damien everything. That the senator knew her, had known her, had perhaps always known her better than Damien had suspected, and was pleased that she was here in a way that had nothing to do with Damien's presence. "Who is she with?" Celeste asked, at his left. He didn't answer. The second man to reach her was Julius Hargrove, who took her hand in both of his and held it for a moment with the particular warmth of someone acknowledging a genuine peer. The third was Victor Wren, whose composure Damien had always considered absolute. Wren bent slightly, not a bow, not quite, but the inclination of someone acknowledging a different order of authority, and said something that made her smile. The smile was the one Damien remembered from before he forgot to pay attention to it. The one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth. The one that meant she was genuinely amused rather than socially performing. He remembered exactly when he had stopped making her smile like that. He could not, standing in the middle of the ballroom he controlled, have told anyone precisely when it was, but the memory of the smile told him it had been a long time. Marcus was back at his elbow. "Sir, I've been informed that the arrival was pre-coordinated with the hotel's VIP security team. The authorization came from a private office called—" He hesitated in a way Marcus almost never hesitated. "Eclipse Dominion." Damien heard the name as though from a distance. Eclipse Dominion was not a name that people in Damien's world spoke with uncertainty. It was spoken the way people speak about geological events, with the kind of respect accorded to forces that operate at a scale beyond individual control. Eclipse Dominion was the most powerful private investment consortium in the world, had been for nearly a decade, and its ownership was the most aggressively protected secret in global finance. Governments had tried to identify it. Intelligence agencies had spent resources on it. The consortium's legal architecture was so sophisticated that 3 separate corporate law firms, working independently, had concluded that identifying its beneficial ownership was technically impossible. "Eclipse Dominion is here," Damien said. "The founder," Marcus said, and something in his voice had changed in a way that Damien registered without yet understanding. "The chairman. The announcement was just given to the hotel events team." Another pause. "Sir, the chairman of Eclipse Dominion is—" Damien already knew. He knew it the way you know the ground is gone before your body registers the fall. He knew it in the space between one breath and the next, in the 3 steps it took Julius Hargrove to lead her toward the center of the room, in the way Senator Aldridge fell into position at her right, as though he'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. He knew it because he looked at her face across that room, across the room he had built, in the hotel he had chosen, at the event he had designed. And he saw something in her expression that 15 years of marriage had apparently not been enough time to learn to read correctly. He saw someone who was exactly where she had always planned to be. The hotel's events director, a thin man named Garrett, whose primary skill was managing large groups of powerful people without injury to anyone, approached a small podium at the east end of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone once. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Whitaker Hotel is honored to announce the presence this evening of a distinguished guest." The financial world has long speculated about the identity behind Eclipse Dominion, one of the world's most influential private investment institutions. Tonight, the chairman of Eclipse Dominion has chosen to make her identity known. He paused with the timing of someone who understood the value of a pause. "Please welcome Vivienne Moreau, founder and chairman of Eclipse Dominion." The room responded the way rooms respond to things they've been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. The applause was the kind Damien had spent 30 years trying to generate, genuine, uncoerced, the sound of 212 people registering something they hadn't expected and responding to it honestly. Damien did not applaud. He stood in the middle of the ballroom with a champagne glass he had forgotten was in his hand, and he felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely unable to calculate the next move, because the next moves were already happening without him. Senator Aldridge was talking to her with the animated attention he reserved for his largest donors. Victor Wren was beside her with an expression Damien had never seen on Victor's face in 12 years of doing business with him, which was something close to relief. The expression of a man who has been required to be discreet about something for a very long time and has just been released from that requirement. Julius Hargrove leaned in and said something that made her nod, and then she opened a small clutch he had not noticed until now and produced, "No, it was not possible. It was not. It was a signed letter of agreement. He could see the Kastner letterhead from 15 feet away. His acquisition. The acquisition that Damien's team had spent 8 months and $4 million in legal and advisory fees preparing for. The acquisition that Marcus had confirmed was still pending as of this morning." Hargrove was reading it, and his expression was the expression of a man confirming something he was genuinely pleased to confirm. Damien Moreau, who had not felt fear in the conventional sense since 1997, stood in his ballroom in his charcoal suit beside a woman whose name he no longer remembered putting on the guest list, and felt the specific, disorienting sensation of a man watching his own empire from the outside. At his left, Celeste Arnaud touched his arm. "Damien, are you—" "Don't," he said. His voice came out wrong, not angry. He was past that particular register. It came out like something compressed too long in a too small space. Marcus was talking in his earpiece about the Kastner announcement, about the Eclipse Blind Trust, about how the consortium's holding structure meant that 3 other acquisition targets Damien had been pursuing for the past 6 months had already been quietly secured through entities he now understood he should have examined more carefully. He was delivering these facts in the tone of someone who has run out of ways to soften information and has reverted to simple transmission. Damien was not listening. He was watching his wife accept congratulations from the most powerful people in the room he had built, and he was understanding, slowly and with the specific pain of things understood too late, that the room had always, in some fundamental way, been hers. Across the ballroom, Vivienne Moreau met his eyes exactly once. It was not triumphant. That was the thing that undid him. It was not triumphant at all. It was the look of a woman who has been waiting for someone to finally see her, and has made her peace with the fact that the scene has arrived too late and is no longer standing in the light for his benefit. She was standing in the light because it was where she had always belonged. She looked away. Julius Hargrove was guiding her toward the tables where the syndicate's financial partners were assembling, and she was moving with him naturally, as though she had always known the geography of this room, because she'd had access to every floor plan and seating chart and security protocol of every gala Damien had ever hosted, and had never needed to show it until tonight. Marcus was still talking. The words were reaching Damien in fragments now. Eclipse Dominion had quietly financed portions of Damien's own syndicate operations through subsidiary structures he hadn't traced: the Serbian corridor, the Jersey real estate front. 3 different offshore vehicles he'd believed were clean had Eclipse capital in their foundation layers, which meant that Vivienne had, for a period of years Damien could not yet calculate, been quietly, invisibly holding up portions of the very empire he believed he had built independently. She had not built against him. She had built beneath him. She had made herself foundational, and he had never looked down. Celeste was saying something about leaving. He heard it from very far away. He made no response. He was standing in the middle of 212 people and feeling something he did not have a clean word for. Not humiliation exactly, though that was part of it. Not grief, though something adjacent to grief was active somewhere below his ribcage. What it most closely resembled, if he had been the kind of man who examined his own interior states with any regularity, was the feeling of opening a room you thought you knew and finding that the room went on much, much further than the wall you thought you were looking at. He had been looking at a wall for 15 years, convinced it was the end of the room. The room went on for as far as he could see. At 9:03, Marcus confirmed that the Kastner acquisition had been formally awarded to Eclipse Dominion at a board meeting held that afternoon. The announcement would be public in the morning. The $4 million in fees that Damien's team had spent preparing the bid would be returned minus costs, as per standard rejection protocol. At 9:11, Victor Wren crossed the ballroom and stopped in front of Damien for the first time all evening. Victor was not a man who spoke for effect. He was a man who spoke when he had something to say, and who expected to be heard when he said it. "You're a fool," Victor said quietly, without heat. "The way you say something obvious to someone who is finally ready to hear it. You've always been a fool about her specifically. The rest of it—" He made a small gesture that took in the room, the empire, the 30 years. "The rest of it you've been sharp enough. But about her—" He shook his head once. "Inexcusable." He moved on before Damien could respond. Damien stood where he was for another moment. The orchestra was playing something he didn't recognize. The room was doing what rooms full of powerful people do when a significant realignment has just occurred. Continuing to function, continuing to eat and drink and network and negotiate, because powerful people understand that the redistribution of power is not a crisis, but a natural condition, and they adapt to it the way water adapts to a new channel. She was on the far side of the ballroom now, seated between Senator Aldridge and a man Damien recognized as the European director of a sovereign wealth fund he had tried to access unsuccessfully for 3 years. She was talking. The men around her were listening with the attentiveness people only bring to conversations they believe will change something. Damien's phone buzzed, a single text from a number he didn't recognize. 6 words. "Meet me in the Aldridge suite, 10. He looked at the number. Then he looked across the room. She wasn't looking at him. She hadn't looked at him since that single moment at the entrance. He had 2 hours. He spent them doing the only thing left to do, moving through the room, shaking hands that were being extended out of habit or politeness, or the particular social maintenance that powerful people perform even in moments of significant shift. He moved through conversations that he registered without absorbing, accepted condolences about the Kastner acquisition from men who phrased their condolences carefully because they were now aware that his wife had won it, and tried, with the focused effort of a man who had always controlled his interior weather, to organize what he was feeling into something he could use. He could not. It kept reorganizing into something else, something formless and persistent that had to do with greenhouses and roses, and a woman in her garden clothes at 6:40 in the morning who had heard the news of her own erasure and responded by finishing a pruning cut before she turned around. At 9:58, he took the service elevator to the 4th floor. At 10:01, he knocked on the door of the Aldridge suite. It opened immediately. She was standing at the window with her arms crossed, not defensively, but in the way of someone waiting, looking out at the midtown lights with the expression of a person who has decided exactly what they're going to say and is simply waiting for the room to be ready to receive it. She turned when she heard the door close, and Damien Moreau, who had not been rendered speechless in 30 years of operating in rooms full of people who use silence as a weapon, found that he had nothing. Not a single opening, not one word that felt adequate to stand at the beginning of whatever this conversation was going to require him to survive. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down, Damien. There are things you need to understand, and I don't intend to say them twice." Damien sat. That was the thing that surprised her, though she kept it off her face. She had prepared for him to remain standing, to use the room the way he always used rooms, establishing physical dominance before a single word was exchanged, positioning himself near the door or the window or whatever surface gave him the most spatial authority. It was a habit so ingrained in him that she doubted he was conscious of doing it. She had watched him do it for 15 years at dinner tables and boardrooms and private meetings in rooms exactly like this one. He sat in the chair nearest the window and he put his hands on his knees and he looked at her. And for a moment there was nothing in his expression that she recognized from the man she had spent the last decade quietly outmaneuvering. What was there instead was something older, something from before the suits and the penthouse and the charcoal surfaces of a man who had spent 30 years constructing himself into a symbol. He looked tired. She did not let that soften her. "You had Marcus revoke my access Thursday," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "You didn't tell me yourself." "No." "Why?" He looked at the window. The midtown lights were doing what they always did. That relentless, indifferent glittering that made the city look like something alive and ungovernable, which was part of why he had always loved it. Then he looked back at her. "Because I didn't think you'd make it difficult," he said. "I thought you'd understand what it meant and let it happen quietly." The honesty of it landed differently than she'd expected. She had steeled herself for deflection, for the particular brand of Damien Moreau justification she had witnessed applied to dozens of difficult situations over 15 years, the restructuring of facts into a narrative that centered his logic and his necessity. She had not prepared for plain admission. She moved from the window and sat in the chair across from him. Not close. The low table between them held a water pitcher and 2 glasses and a small arrangement of white flowers she hadn't requested and didn't look at. "Tell me what you thought it meant," she said. He exhaled slowly. His hands on his knees were still. Damien's hands were always still when he was thinking. She had noticed that in year 2 of their marriage, cataloged it the way she had cataloged everything about him, because she had been, for a long time, completely absorbed in understanding him. That absorption had faded. What replaced it had been, she recognized now, something more durable. "I thought it meant I was making a change," he said, "in how the syndicate presents itself, in what the public-facing image of the organization looks like going forward. Celeste fits that image. And I don't. You're—" He stopped, restarted. "You've been content with the estate, the greenhouse, the—" He made a gesture that she understood was intended to encompass the domestic architecture of her life as he had perceived it. "You thought I was content," she said, "or you decided it was easier to believe I was content." The distinction registered on his face. "Maybe both." "There's no maybe in it, Damien. You decided. You decided years ago that I had reached a ceiling and stopped looking at me. I was convenient as furniture. I was presentable when needed and ignorable the rest of the time. You stopped asking what I was doing. You stopped being curious about me. You stopped—" She paused, and the pause was not for effect, but because the next word required something from her that she had rationed carefully and did not intend to waste. "You stopped treating me like someone whose interior life was worth your attention." He was quiet. She had expected him to push back. The fact that he didn't was itself information. "How long?" he asked. "Eclipse Dominion. How long?" The foundational structure was established in the 8th year of our marriage. He did a calculation. She watched him do it. 7 years, he said. 7 years of active operation. The conceptual groundwork started earlier. While we were— He stopped again. Outside, a siren somewhere on the avenue below wound up and faded. "While we were living together." "While we were living in the same house," she said. "Those are not always the same thing." He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees and pressed his hands together, and she recognized that posture too. It was the one he used when he was assembling something, when he was taking a complex situation apart to find the load-bearing structure beneath it. He had used it in negotiations. He had used it at dinner once, early in their marriage, when she had told him something about her family that had disturbed him, and she had found it then. That focused, problem-solving attention. Enormously attractive. She did not find it attractive now. She found it, if anything, slightly sad. "The Serbian corridor," he said. "The Jersey real estate, the offshore vehicles." "Yes." He looked up. "You were financing portions of my own operations." "Subsidiary portions, through entities with no traceable connection to Eclipse. Your financial team had no reason to look further than the surface structure, and the surface structure was clean." "You were holding up parts of my empire," he said, "and I never—" He stopped. "You never looked," she said. "No." The silence between them had a texture now. Not hostile exactly. Something more complicated than hostility. The specific quality of silence between two people who are both finally saying the true things after a long time of saying the adjacent things. "Why?" he asked. "Why finance my operations? Why not just build your own separate structure, keep it completely clean of me?" She looked at him steadily. "Because for a long time, Damien, I still wanted us to win together. I still wanted the thing we'd built to mean something. I wasn't building against you. I was building alongside you, in a language you'd decided you didn't need to learn." Something moved through his face at that. She cataloged it and moved on. "That changed," she said, "not dramatically, not with one event. It changed the way things erode, gradually, and then all at once. I withdrew the operational support from your structures over the past 2 years, quietly. Replaced it with clean capital from other sources so there was no disruption that would alert your team. I needed you functional for what was coming. Tonight. Tonight was a confirmation, not a plan. The plan was already complete. Kastner was always going to Eclipse. The partnerships your team has been cultivating for 8 months, the Peruvian Capital Corridor, the European Sovereign Connection, the Hargrove Secondary Financing Agreement, all of those have already signed preliminary term sheets with Eclipse entities. Your team will receive formal withdrawal notices in the coming days." He stared at her. The tiredness in his face was shifting into something else now. Not anger, not yet, but the precursor to anger, the moment before the body understands what the mind already knows. "That's—" He stopped, his jaw set. "That's years of work." "Yes," she said. "It is." You took years of syndicate work and moved it. I didn't take it. I offered a better structure through channels that weren't connected to your organization, and the counterparties chose Eclipse. Because Eclipse is cleaner, better capitalized, and has a 15-year track record of delivering exactly what it promises. She kept her voice level. This is not revenge, Damien. This is business. This is what you taught me. That landed. She saw it land. His shoulders moved slightly. Not a flinch exactly, more like the involuntary adjustment of a man who has been struck and is integrating the strike before responding. I taught you, he said, everything I know about patience, about timing, about the construction of power that doesn't announce itself. I learned it watching you. You used to say that the most dangerous force in any room was the one nobody was tracking. You said it so many times I stopped hearing it as a maxim and started hearing it as an instruction. He stood up, not toward her, just up, the movement of a man whose body needed to redistribute something his stillness couldn't contain. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her and looked out at the city he had built his identity around. The notification, he said, without turning. To your secondary account. Marcus said it was misdirected. Human error, she said. Was it? Does it matter? He turned. Yes. It matters whether you knew before Thursday or whether you found out Thursday. She held his gaze. I've known since Tuesday. Marcus flagged the list revision internally on Monday. My access to Eclipse's security monitoring includes certain communication filters that your team is unaware of. The notification Thursday was a system error. The knowledge was not. You've had a week. I've had 7 years, she said. The week was just when I decided to stop waiting. He came back toward her, not sitting, standing at the edge of the table with his hands at his sides, and the particular physical energy of Damien Moreau when he was trying very hard to maintain control of something that was pressing against the container he'd put it in. Celeste, he said. I'm not interested in Celeste. I need you to understand. I understand perfectly, she said. She's 31, and she's beautiful, and she reflects the image you want to project for the next phase of your organization, and she doesn't have 15 years of history with you that complicates your self-narrative. I understand all of that. It doesn't interest me. Then what does interest you? His voice had changed. Something had dropped out of it. The performance layer, the managerial control that he applied to his voice, the way he applied it to his surfaces. What was underneath was rougher, older. She recognized it. What does any of this get you, Vivian? Tonight, the room, the presentation. What does it get you? Clarity, she said. Yours and mine both. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have tonight. He pulled out the chair and sat again, this time with the weight of a man who has run out of the energy required to perform composure. He sat heavily, and for a moment he just breathed, and the breathing was unsteady in a way that Damien Moreau's breathing was almost never unsteady in her presence. I have to ask you something, he said. Ask. The operations I mentioned, the Serbian corridor, Jersey, the offshore vehicles. He looked up at her. Was there ever a moment where you considered using what you knew to end it, the syndicate, expose it? The question hung in the room between them. She understood what it cost him to ask it, the admission of vulnerability it required, the acknowledgement that she had held that capability and he hadn't known it. No, she said. Why not? Because whatever I think of what you've become, the syndicate employs 400 people in legitimate operations alone. Because dismantling it without a controlled transition would create a vacuum that would be filled by something worse within 18 months. And because... She paused. The next part required its own accuracy. Because I am not in the business of destruction. I never have been. I build things. Something in his face shifted. Not relief. Too complicated for relief. Something more like the expression of a man who has been shown the dimensions of a thing he thought he understood and is realizing the dimensions are entirely different from what he measured. What happens now? He asked. To the syndicate, to the partnerships, to... He didn't finish the last part of that sentence. She understood what the last part was. The syndicate continues, she said. The operations that can be restructured cleanly will be. The ones that can't. Those are your decisions, not mine. Eclipse has no interest in the criminal infrastructure. We never did. What we absorbed were the legitimate financial channels, and those absorption agreements were entered into freely by the counterparties. And us. And she looked at him for a long moment. This was the part she had not scripted, because this was the part that depended on variables she couldn't model. This was the part that was actually human, which was the part that had always been the most difficult to calculate. I don't know, she said. The honesty of it seemed to hit him harder than the business information had. His jaw moved. He looked at the table. That's... He stopped. Tried again. After everything you just... Damien. Her voice was even, not cold, even the way a surface is even when it's been worked into balance. You erased me from a guest list without telling me. You planned to stand in that room tonight with another woman and let every person we know draw the obvious conclusion. You decided I had expired, and you arranged for my expiration without the basic courtesy of a conversation. I'm telling you I don't know. That is not nothing. Don't treat it like nothing. He was quiet for a very long time. The city outside continued doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, lit up in every window with some version of someone's private reckoning. I've been, he started, stopped. The sentence seemed to give him physical difficulty. I've been looking at a version of you that I invented. For a long time. Yes, she said. You have. The real version, he exhaled. The real version is, I don't know the real version. I thought I did. You knew who I was when we married, she said. You just stopped paying attention to who I kept becoming. He nodded slowly. There was something in the nod that was not agreement exactly, but closer to the first motion of a very long reckoning, the kind that doesn't resolve in an evening, or a month, or perhaps in any calculable time frame. Then his phone went off. He glanced at it involuntarily. The reflex of a man whose phone had been a command center for 30 years, whose every alert carried operational weight. She watched his face change as he read it. The reckoning that had been beginning to form in his expression was displaced by something sharper. He stood. Marcus? What? Marcus has been... He read further. The color shifted in his face in a way she hadn't seen before, not in 15 years, not in any of the dozens of crises she had watched him navigate. 3 of the syndicate's primary financial accounts have been frozen, simultaneously, federal flag. She kept her expression still. When? The freeze timestamps are... His eyes moved across the screen. 9:43, tonight, during the Gala. She said nothing. He looked up from the phone, and in his eyes was the question he was not yet asking out loud because he was not yet certain he wanted to hear the answer, but it was there, fully formed, sharp as a blade. Had she known this was coming? Had she known and said nothing while they sat in this room and she spoke to him about clarity, about building rather than destroying, about not having an interest in ending the syndicate? His phone went off again. And again. Marcus calling now, not texting. Aldridge's name on a second device. Victor Wren on a third. She stood from her chair and smoothed the dark blue of her gown with both hands, a gesture so ordinary and contained that it was almost more unsettling than anything she had said in the past 40 minutes. You should take those calls, she said. Vivian. His voice had dropped to something she barely recognized. Did you know about the federal action? She picked up her clutch from the side table. She looked at him, and what was in her expression was something he would spend a long time afterward trying to correctly name. It was not guilt, and it was not triumph, and it was not the particular blankness of a lie being maintained. It was something more like the expression of a person standing at the edge of a decision they made a long time ago and are only now watching arrive. There are things I built, she said, and things I didn't build. The difference matters. You'll want to understand it quickly. She walked to the door. Vivian, she opened it. The accounts that were frozen, she said without turning. Pull the ownership structure, all the way down to the foundation layer. Read every name on every document. She paused at the threshold. Then call me. She walked out. The door closed behind her with the quiet, definitive sound of a well-made thing functioning exactly as intended. Damien stood in the center of the Aldridge suite with 3 phones demanding his attention, and the city blazing outside the window, and the specific sensation of a man who has just realized that the ground he believed he was standing on is a surface, and beneath the surface is a structure, and the structure was built by someone else entirely, and he does not yet know how deep it goes. He pulled the ownership structure at 1114 in the Aldridge suite with Marcus on one line and the syndicate's primary legal counsel, a man named Forrest Elgin, on another, and Victor Wren standing in the doorway, having let himself in without knocking, because Victor Wren had long since passed the point in his relationship with Damien where doors meant something. The documents came through on the secure tablet Marcus carried everywhere, an encrypted device that had never once been connected to a public network, that was wiped and replaced every 90 days, that represented the most careful piece of operational security the syndicate maintained. Marcus laid it on the table without a word. His face had the specific gray quality of a man who has already read what he is presenting and has had 10 minutes to begin processing it. Damien read. The room was very quiet. Victor leaned against the doorframe with his arms folded and said nothing. Marcus stood at the window with his back to the room, which was how Marcus dealt with things he couldn't fix. He removed himself from the visual field of whoever was doing the reckoning, as though his presence would constitute an intrusion on something private. The ownership structure of the 3 frozen accounts went down 11 layers. 11. Damien had always considered anything beyond 4 layers to be excessive architecture, the kind of structural depth that attracted attention rather than deflecting it, because federal investigators understood that legitimate complexity rarely exceeded a certain depth before it became concealment. He had built his own structures to a maximum of 6. He had considered 6 the ceiling of what could be defended as normal financial complexity. 11 layers. At the 4th layer, the entities were registered in jurisdictions he didn't recognize. At the 7th layer, the beneficial ownership began to diffuse through a network of holding structures that cross-referenced each other in a pattern he had never seen. Not circular, not pyramidal, but something more like a web, where pulling any single thread redistributed tension across the whole without revealing a center. At the 11th layer, the foundational capital source was a blind trust registered in the Cayman Islands under a trustee name that meant nothing to him. Meridian Stewardship, Limited, with a corporate address that, when Marcus had run it in the past 40 minutes, resolved to a registered agent service used by approximately 11,000 other entities worldwide. But the account numbers in the foundational documentation were not nothing. He knew those account numbers. He had looked at them before, in a different context, in a different set of documents, in a year that now felt like it belonged to a different life. Elgin, he said, I'm here. Forrest Elgin's voice on the phone was the voice of a man who had spent 30 years being calm in rooms where other men were not calm and had developed a professional serenity that was either genuine or so thoroughly practiced that the distinction had stopped mattering. The Meridian Stewardship Trust, the foundational account numbers. Pull the 2019 capitalization records for the syndicate's primary operating reserve, the rebuild after the Brussels situation. A pause. He heard keys. I have them. Compare. Another pause. Longer. Victor unfolded his arms. Damien. Elgin's voice had changed. The professional serenity was still there, but something had moved beneath it, the way water moves beneath ice, the surface intact, the motion underneath undeniable. The capitalization source for the 2019 reserve rebuild and the foundational trust behind these frozen accounts share 3 sequential account identifiers. Which means what, exactly, Victor said. Not to Elgin. To Damien. Damien set the tablet down on the table. He set it down with the deliberate care of a man managing something that wants to go a different direction. It means that the capital that rebuilt the syndicate's operating reserve after Brussels partially originated from a source connected to Vivian's blind trust structure. Victor was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. She's been inside the syndicate's capital base since 2019 at minimum. That's 6 years. At minimum, Damien said again. He stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood where Marcus had been standing, looking out at the city, and the city looked exactly as it always looked, merciless, lit, indifferent to whatever reckoning was occurring in whichever room you happened to be occupying when your understanding of your own life restructured itself without your permission. His breathing was not right. He was aware of this the way you become aware of your own heartbeat in a quiet room. Suddenly, and with the mild alarm of something you normally rely on functioning automatically now, demanding conscious attention. He regulated it. He had learned to regulate it at 19, working for a man in New Orleans who operated on the principle that the first person in any confrontation to visibly lose control of their breathing had already lost the confrontation. He regulated it. He looked at the city. The federal freeze, he said. It was triggered by a suspicious activity report. Who filed it? We're working on that, Marcus said from his position at the window. Stop working on it and tell me who filed it. Marcus turned. His expression was the expression of a man delivering the second piece of a very bad thing after already delivering the first piece. The SAR was filed by the compliance officer of Meridian Stewardship, Limited, filed 6 days ago. The freeze was activated tonight in coordination with the filing, on a schedule that... He stopped. On a schedule that what? That would have been set when the SAR was filed, 6 days ago, Tuesday. The word arrived in Damien's chest and sat there with the specific weight of something that has been true for a while and is only now being admitted into the room. Tuesday was when Vivian had known about the guest list change. Tuesday was when she had, by her own account in this very suite 40 minutes ago, known about his plans and activated her long-prepared strategy. She filed it, Victor said. She didn't file it herself, Damien said. The compliance officer of Meridian filed it. Her compliance officer, Victor said, of her trust. Damien turned from the window. We don't know that Meridian is... Damien! Victor's voice was flat. Not unkind, but flat in the way of someone who has run out of patience for indirection. We know. He did know. He had known since the fourth layer of the ownership structure, if he was being honest with himself, which was not a practice he was accustomed to performing in real time. He had known and he had kept reading because finishing the reading delayed the moment of full acknowledgement, and full acknowledgement was going to require him to do something he had not done in 30 years of building and maintaining and defending a criminal empire. It was going to require him to ask for help. His phone was ringing again. Senator Aldridge for the third time. He declined it. Aldridge would want to know what was happening with the syndicate's financial exposure, because Aldridge had been receiving quarterly payments from a syndicate subsidiary for 11 years, and those payments were routed through one of the 3 frozen accounts. And Aldridge was smart enough to understand that frozen accounts had a way of becoming examined accounts, and examined accounts had a way of becoming evidence. He declined Aldridge a third time and called her. She answered on the second ring. You filed the SAR, he said. The compliance officer of Meridian filed SAR, she said, as required by law upon identifying certain irregularities in the account documentation. Don't. Don't what? Don't give me the technical version. Not tonight. Did you initiate it? A pause. Outside the window, a helicopter crossed between buildings, its light blinking red and then gone. Yes, she said. He had expected it. It still hit him like something structural giving way. The syndicate's operating accounts are frozen pending investigation of source of funds documentation. Yes, I know. Vivian, the exposure in those accounts. If the investigation moves past the surface documents. I know what's in those accounts, Damien. I built the structures around them. I know exactly where the documentation becomes difficult, and I know exactly what a federal examiner will find if they go past layer 4. Then you know what you've done. I know what I've done, she said, and her voice was steady in the particular way of someone who has lived with a decision long enough that the steadiness is real. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The SAR was calibrated. The irregularities flagged were real, but they're at the level of documentation inconsistency, not criminal exposure. A competent attorney, and you have 3 of them, can resolve the documentation question within 30 days. The accounts will be unfrozen. The investigation will close. He heard what she was telling him. He also heard what she wasn't. But the process will require full documentation disclosure to federal compliance reviewers, which means that the subsidiary routing through those accounts, including the Aldridge payments, will be visible to syndicate counsel during the documentation assembly. The silence between them had a different quality now, not the complicated layered silence of the suite earlier. This was the silence of something being decided. You want me to cut Aldridge, he said. I want you to understand that the syndicate's survival through this investigation depends on what you choose to disclose voluntarily versus what gets found. The difference between those two things is the difference between a documentation issue and a criminal indictment. If I cut Aldridge, he has no documentation connecting him to the syndicate that can't be explained as legitimate political donation activity through the PAC structure. He's protected as long as he's separated cleanly and quickly. He's been on the syndicate's books for 11 years, which is why separating him now, cleanly, with a conversation rather than a deposition, is the only version of this where both of you walk away functional. He pulled out the chair and sat down again, heavily, in the chair he'd been sitting in earlier when she had said the things she had said, and he had felt the first motion of a very long reckoning. The reckoning was moving considerably faster now. "You're managing this," he said. "Even now. You're managing the outcome." "I told you," she said. "I don't build against you. I never did. The SAR says otherwise. The SAR says I'm unwilling to be erased without consequence. Those are different things." He pressed the heel of his hand against his right eye. A headache had established itself behind his right temple sometime in the past hour with the quiet persistence of a structural problem that had been building for years before it became visible as a problem. "What do you want, Vivian? Finally, tonight, after all of this. What is it that you actually want? Tonight?" A pause. "Tonight I want you to call Forrest Elgin back and tell him to begin voluntary disclosure preparation. I want you to call Aldridge and have a conversation that will be uncomfortable but survivable for both of you. And I want you to go home, not to the penthouse, to Connecticut, to the estate." Another pause, shorter. "The climbing roses on the east wall need attention before the frost comes in. I wasn't going to get to them this week." He almost laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound a man makes when he encounters something so simultaneously absurd and exact that his body responds before his mind has categorized it. "You want me to tend your roses?" "I want you to tend something," she said. "You've spent 30 years building. You're not good at tending. It might be worth learning before there's nothing left that requires it." The line went quiet for a moment. "The Kastner acquisition," he said, "is finalized. The Peruvian corridor, the Hargrove secondary financing, both signed with Eclipse. The sovereign wealth connection. Preliminary terms executed this afternoon. Full execution next week." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. He nodded the way you nod when a medical professional is giving you an account of an injury's full extent. Not agreement, just the physical motion of absorption. "You've taken everything. I've taken the things that were always moving toward me," she said. "The things your team was offering to the market, and the market was redirecting my direction because I was the better offer. I didn't steal them. I outbid them." "Vivian." "Yes." He breathed, regulated. Let the city blaze outside the window and the headache do what it was going to do, and the weight of the evening settle into whatever shape it was going to permanently take. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out with the roughness of words that haven't been used in their genuine form in a very long time. Not the performative apology of a man managing a situation, the other kind, the kind that costs something. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had changed by a fraction, still even, still contained, but with something underneath it that was not entirely closed. "I know," she said. "Go to Connecticut, Damien." She ended the call. He sat with the dead phone in his hand for a moment. Then he looked at Victor, who had remained in the doorway through the entire call with the stillness of a man who understood when to be furniture. "Go home," Victor said. "I'll coordinate with Elgin tonight. The disclosure prep can start in the morning. The accounts will be manageable. She said 30 days. She's not wrong about these things." Victor pushed off the doorframe. "She's apparently never been wrong about these things. It would have been useful to know that sooner." He left. Marcus had already gone. Damien hadn't noticed him leave, which was itself a measure of how thoroughly the evening had restructured his normal situational awareness. The suite was empty. The city was doing what it did. The white flowers in the center table arrangement had begun to lose their formal arrangement slightly, one stem leaning against its neighbor in the slow, unglamorous way that cut things lose their structure when nobody is attending to them. Damien Moreau, who had built an empire on the principle that the man who controlled the room controlled the outcome, sat alone in a room he no longer controlled, and tried to locate the version of himself that existed before he had decided that the woman tending her greenhouse on a Connecticut estate was scenery. He couldn't find it. What he found instead, and this arrived with the particular unwelcome clarity of things that arrive too late to be useful in their proper time, was a memory from the 4th year of their marriage. A dinner in the Connecticut estate, a night in late October not unlike this one. She had been telling him something about a financial structure she was considering, something theoretical. She'd framed it as a thought experiment about layered holding entities and capital concealment that she'd described over the lamb course with the animated precision she brought to things that genuinely interested her. He had nodded and said something about passing the salt. He had not been listening. He had been thinking about a situation in Brussels that required his attention the following morning, and he had looked at her across their dinner table and nodded and said something about the salt. And she had paused in the middle of what she was saying and looked at him for a moment, and then she had passed the salt and changed the subject, and he had not noticed. He noticed now. The thought experiment she had described over the lamb in October of their 4th year was, he understood now with the full-body horror of a man reading a document backward, the foundational architecture of Eclipse Dominion. She had told him at dinner, and he had asked for the salt. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He straightened his cuffs in the automatic way of a man whose body performs grooming behaviors when his mind has temporarily vacated the premises. He stood. In the corridor outside the Aldridge suite, the hotel's normal evening activity continued its ordinary circulation. Staff moving with the particular purposeful quiet of good hospitality, guests in the distant murmur of other people's evenings, the gentle mechanical sound of an elevator arriving and departing. He took the elevator down, crossed the lobby without acknowledging anyone, and walked out of the Whitaker Hotel into the October air, which was cold now, and sharp with the specific bite of a city that has stopped performing warmth for the evening and reverted to its actual temperature. His car was waiting. The driver opened the door. He got in and sat in the silence of the back seat and looked at his phone one more time. Marcus had sent a summary document. Elgin had sent 3 emails with preliminary disclosure notes. Aldridge had called twice more. He opened none of them. He said one thing to the driver. Connecticut. The car moved into traffic. The city slid past the windows in its usual indifferent blaze, and Damien watched it the way you watch something you have loved for a long time from the wrong angle, with the complicated specific grief of understanding that the thing hasn't changed, that it has always been exactly what it is, and that the error was entirely in the watching. His phone lit up one more time as the car crossed the bridge. Not a call. Not Marcus. Not Elgin. Not Aldridge. A photograph from an unknown number. No caption. The photograph was of the Aldridge suite, taken from outside the window, from an angle that would have required someone to be on the building's exterior or in the building directly across the street with a long lens. It showed Damien sitting at the table. It showed Vivian across from him. It showed the particular geometry of their conversation. 2 people, across a low table, in the posture of people saying true things at great cost. The timestamp on the photograph was 10:23. During the conversation. While it was happening, someone had been watching. Someone who was not Vivian, because Vivian did not send photographs from unknown numbers, because Vivian did not work like that, because in 11 years of watching her work, Adrian Mercer had never once employed a tactic that was designed to frighten rather than inform. Someone else had been in that conversation in a way that Damien had not known about, and Vivian, he was suddenly, coldly certain, had not planned for. His hand had gone still around the phone. The bridge was behind them now. Connecticut was ahead. The car moved through the dark with its reliable, expensive silence, and Damien Moreau sat in the back and understood that the evening he had believed he understood, the evening that had restructured his empire and his marriage and his understanding of his own life, had contained the entire time a variable that neither he nor Vivian had accounted for. Someone else was in this. Someone who had watched them both all evening and had waited until Damien was alone in a moving car crossing a bridge to let him know they'd been watching. And the message encoded in that timing was not subtle. You are between places, the message said, and you cannot go back, and what is waiting ahead of you is not what you think it is. He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he called the one number he had not yet called tonight, a number he kept in no contact list, memorized only, used 3 times in 30 years, each time representing the kind of situation that could not be managed through normal operational channels because the threat was not normal, and the channel had to match the threat. It rang twice. A voice answered that belonged to a man Damien had not spoken to in 4 years, a man who owed him something significant and had been waiting in the particular patient way of men who carry debts they cannot discharge through ordinary means, for the call that would finally present the opportunity to... The voice on the other end of the line belonged to a man named Carver Reed. Not his real name. His real name was something Eastern European with too many consonants that he had legally replaced in 1998 when he became an American citizen in a federal courthouse in Baltimore, sweating through a shirt he'd borrowed, repeating an oath with the concentrated sincerity of a man who understood that reinvention required complete commitment to the performance of the new identity until the performance became the identity. Carver Reed had been performing himself for 28 years, and the performance had long since become real, which was the only kind of reinvention that actually worked. He was 61, built like someone who had been large and powerful at 40 and had compressed into something denser and quieter with age. He ran an asset management firm in Georgetown that was legitimate in all the ways that mattered for licensing purposes and considerably less legitimate in its deeper operational function, which was to provide financial intelligence services to a small number of clients who could not use conventional intelligence services because the things they needed to know were not the kinds of things conventional intelligence services would provide. He was the third most dangerous man Damien knew. "I need to know who was in the room," Damien said. No greeting, no preliminary. 4 years of silence, and he came in without a preamble because Carver Reed was not a man who needed context. Carver Reed consumed the photograph Damien forwarded in approximately 30 seconds, and then was quiet for approximately 15. And in that 15 seconds, Damien's car crossed into Connecticut, and the city's light pollution began to thin behind them, and the dark thickened the way it thickened outside cities with actual depth. "Where'd this come from?" Carver said. "Unknown number, 20 minutes ago." The angle is from the office building directly east of the Whitaker, 3rd floor, northwest corner office. Long lens, probably 400mm minimum. A pause. "This isn't surveillance, Damien. Surveillance doesn't announce itself. This is a message. I know it's a message. Who sent it? Give me 6 hours. I don't have 6 hours. I have whoever sent this knowing I'm currently in a vehicle heading to Connecticut. Because they sent this precisely when I was in a vehicle heading to Connecticut, which means they're either tracking the car or they have someone in the hotel who watched me leave." A beat of silence. Carver was processing. Damien knew the quality of that silence, had heard it twice before in 30 years, each time preceding information that rearranged his understanding of a situation completely. "The Kastner acquisition," Carver said. "What about it? Who else was competing for it besides your organization?" Damien thought. 3 parties submitted formal bids, the Syndicate, Eclipse Dominion, and a third party that the Kastner board declined to identify publicly. "The third party?" Carver said. "Did your intelligence team identify them?" "We believed it was a German sovereign investment vehicle, clean, institutional, not competitive in the criminal infrastructure sense." "It's not German," Carver said, "and it's not institutional." Another pause, and this one had a different texture, the texture of a man choosing how much to say. "The third Kastner bidder is a man named Solomon Veth, 44. He runs a private equity operation out of Singapore that the financial press describes as aggressive, and which the intelligence community describes differently. He's been building a position in American criminal financial infrastructure for 3 years, quietly, through acquisition targets your syndicate and your wife's consortium have both been pursuing. The car was moving through dark Connecticut highway, the trees on either side bare and gray in the headlights. Damien felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the October air. "He was using us," Damien said. "Both of us. He was watching you compete and mapping your acquisition strategies and their underlying financial structures. Every time the Syndicate or Eclipse moved on a target, Veth's people analyzed the movement and used it to identify adjacent vulnerabilities in your capital architecture." "The photograph. Is him telling you he's been watching tonight specifically? The gala, the suite, the conversation. He has intelligence on both of you that he's been accumulating for, my initial estimate, 3 years minimum." Damien's hand on the phone was tight. He loosened it deliberately. "Vivian, he said. Call her, Carver said. Now. Don't wait until Connecticut. He ended Carver's call and dialed her. She answered in 2 rings. Damien? Solomon Veth. Silence. 3 seconds of it, which from Vivian was the equivalent of a longer silence from anyone else. Where did you get that name? Carver Reed. The photograph I was sent. Veth sent it. He's been running surveillance on both of us. He was the 3rd Kastner bidder. He used our competition to map our financial structures. He paused. Vivian, how much of Eclipse's architecture is visible if someone with serious intelligence resources has been watching your moves for 3 years? Another silence. This one had a different quality from the first. This was the silence of someone performing a rapid internal calculation against information that is changing the variables in real time. Adrian, she said, not to Damien. Then to Damien. Hold. He held. The car moved through the dark. The headache behind his right temple had expanded. She came back in 40 seconds. Adrian has a flag on Veth. He's been on our watch list for 14 months as a potential competitor. We didn't assess him as a threat at this level. Her voice was level, but underneath the levelness something was moving, the way current moves under ice. He has enough of our public-facing acquisition moves to construct a partial map of Eclipse's holding structure. If he's had surveillance resources at the Gala tonight, if he has audio from the suite. He has audio from the suite, Damien said. The silence this time was absolute. He heard everything, she said. Everything. What she said next was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when a calculation resolves to an outcome they cannot immediately metabolize. Then she pulled herself back and he heard her do it. A breath, a fraction of a pause, the particular personal discipline of a woman who had trained herself over years to convert shock into action without losing time to the shock itself. Where is he? She said. I don't know yet. Carver is working it. Tell Carver I'll double his fee and I need a location within 2 hours. Vivian, he heard the SAR conversation. He heard me confirm the Eclipse ownership. He heard the Kastner confirmation. He heard... She stopped. He heard the Aldridge subsidiary routing. If he moves on that information before we complete the voluntary disclosure... I know. The disclosure has to happen tonight, Damien. Not tomorrow morning. Tonight. Elgin needs to file before Veth moves that information anywhere. I'll call Elgin. And the Aldridge conversation. I'll handle Aldridge. It has to be tonight. Vivian? His voice came out with an edge that surprised both of them, sharp and direct in the way it had been in the early years when they were still new enough to each other to show their actual registers. I will handle it. Go find Veth. A pause. Then, be careful on that road. She ended the call. He called Elgin. Then he called Aldridge, who answered on the first ring with the voice of a man who had been sitting beside his phone for 2 hours in a state of ascending anxiety. The conversation with Aldridge lasted 11 minutes and was, as she had predicted, uncomfortable but survivable. Aldridge was a politician, which meant he was fundamentally an animal of self-preservation. And when self-preservation was clearly and unemotionally described to him, he responded to it the way all self-preservation animals respond, with the immediate, efficient recalibration of his position toward safety. He would cooperate with the voluntary disclosure timeline. He would, if asked, characterize the subsidiary payments as consulting fees through the PAC. He would not make further contact until Elgin gave him specific direction. Damien ended the call and sat back and closed his eyes for 90 seconds, which was the closest he had come to rest in 8 hours. When he opened them, his phone had a text from Carver Reed. An address. Midtown. A hotel 4 blocks from the Whitaker, and a single additional line. He's not alone. 3-person team minimum. Security is professional. He forwarded it to Vivian and to Victor. Victor responded in 30 seconds. On it. Vivian responded in 40. Don't let Victor go in first. He stared at the message. Then he told his driver to turn around. The driver, who had been with Damien 11 years and had driven him through 3 previous situations that had required abrupt directional changes in the middle of nighttime highways, turned around without comment. The address Carver had sent resolved to the Meridian Hotel, not the Whitaker, not the Kastner family's preferred venue, not any property connected to the Gala's ecosystem, which was itself a signal. Veth had chosen a hotel with no social or financial connection to tonight's events, a clean property on the west side that catered to corporate travelers, and asked no unusual questions. The kind of place you chose when you needed to be invisible from a particular world while remaining within operational distance of it. Victor was already on site when Damien arrived at 12:47. Victor had two men with him who Damien recognized, former military, Eastern European, the kind of professional security that didn't carry the specific energy of aggression, but rather its opposite, the compressed stillness of men who could move very fast from stillness and preferred not to have to. 14th floor, Victor said without greeting. Room 1407. Veth checked in under a corporate name 3 days ago. His security team has 1405 and 1409. Carver confirmed 3-person team. I count 4. There may be a 5th in the lobby. Damien looked at the hotel entrance. We're not going in loud. I know. This is a conversation. Victor looked at him with the specific expression he reserved for statements that were technically true but contextually optimistic. A conversation, he said, to start. They went in through the service entrance. Victor's people handled the 14th floor corridor with the quiet efficiency of people who had handled corridors before. At 1407, Damien knocked. 2 standard knocks, the interval of someone who expected to be answered. The door opened on a security chain, one eye in the gap. Dark, assessing, professional. Tell Veth that Damien Moreau is here, Damien said, and that this is the conversation he wanted. He sent me a photograph. I'm responding to it. The eye held. The door closed. 40 seconds of silence. Then the chain came off and the door opened, and the security man, tall, broad, carrying himself with the economic physical confidence of someone trained at a level above commercial, stepped back without a word. The room was a junior suite, well lit, with the curtains drawn and a work table set up with 3 screens and communications equipment that was considerably more sophisticated than business travel required. 2 more security personnel were positioned in the room, one near the curtained window, one near the connecting door to 1405. Solomon Veth was sitting at the work table. He was smaller than Damien had constructed him in the car, not slight, but compact, with the kind of contained physical energy that belonged to people who moved very deliberately and rarely wasted motion. 44, as Carver had said, with dark hair going gray at the temples, in a pattern that looked on him less like aging and more like a visual argument for credibility. He was dressed in a suit that cost what good suits cost, and he was looking at Damien with the expression of a man who had been waiting for exactly this visit and had therefore had time to prepare his expression. Mr. Moreau, he said, sit down. I'll stand? As you like. Veth leaned back slightly in his chair. His hands were on the table, visible, relaxed. A man communicating that he had nothing to hide, which was itself a form of hiding. You know who I am. I know enough. Then you know why I sent the photograph. You wanted me to know you were watching. I wanted you to know I'd been watching, Veth said. Past tense matters here. The watching is finished. I have what I came for. Damien felt Victor shift slightly behind him. He put nothing on his face. What did you come for? Information. Veth picked up a glass of water from the table and drank from it without taking his eyes off Damien. Specifically, the complete ownership architecture of Eclipse Dominion and the operational infrastructure of the Moreau Syndicate as they relate to each other. Tonight's gala was, he set the glass down, extraordinarily productive. Your wife is remarkable, incidentally. I don't say that as flattery. I say it as a professional assessment. What she's built is genuinely impressive. You were in the suite. My audio equipment was in the suite. There's a distinction. He allowed something that might have been a smile in a different light. The suite has excellent acoustics. Damien's jaw was tight. He kept his voice level. What do you intend to do with the information? That depends on you. On me. And on Mrs. Moreau. Though she's not here yet, is she? She's on her way, certainly. I expected both of you, frankly. Your wife moves faster than most people. It's one of the things I've admired from a distance. He folded his hands. What I intend to do with the information is use it as the foundation for a partnership proposal. The Moreau Syndicate's criminal infrastructure is mature and well-established. Eclipse Dominion's legitimate financial architecture is the most sophisticated private investment structure I've encountered. Together with appropriate capital injection from my Singapore operation, They represent something significantly larger than either entity alone. A partnership, Damien said. A merger, in practical terms. You surveilled us for 3 years, and tonight you listened to a private conversation through an illegal audio device to propose a merger. I surveilled you to understand what I was proposing to merge with, Beth said. I'm a careful man. I don't invest in things I don't fully understand. The room was very quiet. The security men were stationary. Victor behind Damien was stationary. Everyone in the room understood the particular voltage of the silence and was managing their relationship with it very carefully. And if we decline, Damien said. Beth picked up a tablet from the table and held it up. On the screen was a document, dense, detailed, the structure unmistakable even at the distance Damien was standing. I file a comprehensive intelligence report with 3 federal agencies and 2 foreign governments. The Aldridge subsidiary routing. The Eclipse ownership in full, the syndicate's capital sources for the past decade, the specific account identifiers connecting them. He set the tablet down. Your voluntary disclosure tonight was competent. It won't survive what I have. The headache behind Damien's right temple had become a physical presence. He breathed, regulated. The 19-year-old from New Orleans who had arrived in this city with $40 and a last name that meant nothing was present somewhere beneath the charcoal suit and the 30 years. And that 19-year-old was telling him something about this moment, about the shape of it, about the specific geometry of a threat delivered by a seated man with visible hands and a glass of water. You need us to agree, Damien said. I need your cooperation to make the merger functional. Forced acquisition produces different results than negotiated partnership. You need us both to agree. Yes. Which means you don't have enough to destroy us independently. If you did, you wouldn't propose the merger. You'd simply move. Something shifted in Beth's expression. Fractional, controlled. But there. That's an interesting analysis. The Eclipse architecture, Damien said. You have the ownership confirmation from tonight's audio. But ownership confirmation isn't structural documentation. You know who owns it. You don't know how it's built. Without the how, you can't dismantle it through federal channels because the documentation trail isn't accessible without cooperation from inside Eclipse itself. He watched Beth's face. And the syndicate's criminal infrastructure isn't in the financial records you've assembled. It's in relationships, physical relationships, operational trust built over 30 years that doesn't appear in account structures. He took a step toward the table. You have a map. You don't have the territory. Beth looked at him for a long moment. You're smarter than your recent decision suggested. I've had a clarifying evening. The door of the suite opened. Vivienne walked in without knocking, which she could do because the security man in the corridor was currently having a quiet conversation with 2 of Victor's people that precluded his ability to prevent it. She was still in the dark blue gown. Her hair was still up, though one strand had come loose near her left temple during whatever the past 90 minutes had required of her. She looked at the room, at Beth, at Damien, at the tablet on the table, and she assembled the situation in approximately 3 seconds. She walked to the table and stood beside Damien. Beth looked at them both. Something in his expression adjusted. The recalibration of a man whose scenario has just acquired a variable he'd been told was in transit. Mrs. Moreau, I was just explaining to your husband. I heard, she said. She had stopped 4 feet from the table. Her voice was what it always was, even, precise, carrying the weight of someone who had never needed volume to communicate authority. You want a merger, a partnership. The distinction? I heard you the first time. I heard you through the same audio feed your team was running from the building across the street, Mr. Beth. Adrian identified your equipment signature 14 months ago. We've been running a counterfeed since March. She looked at him with an expression that was entirely devoid of performance. I know exactly what you have. I know exactly what you don't have. And I know that the 3 federal agencies you referenced have each, in the past 7 years, received a minimum of 1 anonymous intelligence package from Eclipse Security that precluded their ability to act on our ownership structure under existing statute. You can file your report. It will sit in a review queue behind 3 existing classification holds and won't move for 18 months minimum. Beth was still. The quality of his stillness had changed. You've been managing the regulatory environment, he said. I've been managing everything, she said. That's what I do. The room held its breath. Veth looked at the tablet, then at Damien, then back at Vivian. And in that sequence of looks was the specific recalibration of a man who has walked into a room believing he held the significant cards and is understanding, with the cold clarity that only genuine intelligence can produce in someone, that the hand he was holding had been seen and countered before he sat down. Then why are you here? He said. If I have nothing, because you have something, she said. The Singapore capital. 3.4 billion in undeployed private equity. We ran your fund structure this afternoon. The capital is clean, the sources are legitimate, and the deployment strategy you've been building toward for 3 years is... She paused with the precision of someone selecting words, not without merit. Beth looked at her for a long time. You want the capital? I want a conversation, she said. A real one, without surveillance equipment and without blackmail architecture. A conversation between people who might actually have something to offer each other, conducted honestly. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Can you do that? Damien watched Veth look at his wife across the work table and understood, with the specific humility of a man who has spent an evening being educated about his own blind spots, that she had walked into this room with a negotiation already structured and was now simply executing it, and that the execution was going to determine the shape of the next several years of both their lives, and that she had not asked him whether this was the approach he would have chosen because she had not needed to, because the approach was right. And she knew it was right, and she had arrived here with the certainty of someone who has been doing the correct thing long enough that the correctness is no longer a question. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Veth looked at them both, side by side at his own table, in his own room, in a situation he had constructed and which had somehow, in the span of 45 minutes, restructured itself around an entirely different logic. And he made the only calculation available to a genuinely intelligent person who has encountered someone smarter. He decided to stop competing and start listening. All right, he said. Good, Vivian said, and folded her hands on the table. And the negotiation that would reshape 3 financial empires and permanently alter the landscape of private capital. In 2 hemispheres began in room 1407 of the Meridian Hotel at 1:19 in the morning on a Saturday in October, with the curtains drawn against the city and 4 security men trying to be invisible in the corners, and a man who had spent 30 years building an empire sitting beside a woman who had spent 7 years building a larger one, and for the first time in longer than either of them could honestly calculate, they were facing the same direction. The negotiation lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Damien knew this because he watched the clock on the wall of room 1407 move from 1:19 to 5:30 with the particular attentiveness of a man who has stopped trusting his internal sense of time, who has had too many of his calibrations proven wrong in a single evening to rely on his own instruments. So he watched the clock. He watched it, and he listened, and occasionally he spoke. And what surprised him, continued to surprise him across all 4 hours and 11 minutes, was how much of the speaking Vivian allowed him to do. She had the negotiation structured. That was clear within the first 20 minutes. She knew Veth's fund, knew its deployment pressures and its LP commitments, and the specific window within which the Singapore capital needed to find a vehicle or face redemption demands that would restructure the fund's timeline in ways Veth could not afford. She had known this, Damien understood, before she walked into the room, probably before she walked into the gala, possibly before Tuesday, which meant that Solomon Veth had been a variable in her calculation for longer than he'd been a variable in Damien's, and that the counter-surveillance feed Adrian had been running since March was not reactive intelligence, but planned preparation for exactly this conversation. But she gave Damien the room. She presented the Eclipse architecture, selectively, precisely, revealing enough to demonstrate the quality of what Veth was being invited into without exposing the structural specifics that Veth's surveillance had failed to obtain. And when it came to the syndicate's role in the proposed structure, the legitimate operational infrastructure, the distribution networks, the established counterparty relationships that represented 30 years of compounded trust in the criminal financial world, she looked at Damien and said simply, "Your turn." So he talked. He talked about the syndicate the way he had never talked about it in a room with someone who was not already inside it, because the room had shifted into a space where that kind of honesty was the only currency with value. He talked about its architecture and its vulnerabilities, and the specific ways in which 400 legitimate employees depended on the stability of an organization that he had built around the assumption of his own permanent presence at its center, which was itself the organization's deepest structural flaw, a flaw he named out loud, in front of Veth, in front of Victor, in front of his wife, and the naming of it cost him something he could feel physically, somewhere behind his sternum, the specific weight of a pride that had been performing as certainty for 30 years and was now, in the pre-dawn quiet of a West Side hotel room, performing as honesty instead. Veth listened. He was a good listener, the disciplined kind, that took notes mentally rather than on paper, that processed in real time and asked questions only when the question would produce information unavailable through continued listening. By 3 a.m, the shape of an agreement had emerged from the conversation the way shapes emerge from fog, gradually, and then with a completeness that made it seem obvious, as though it had always been there, and the talking was merely the act of walking close enough to see it. The Singapore capital would enter Eclipse through a clean acquisition vehicle that Veth's legal team and Eclipse's legal team would co-architect over the following 60 days. Eclipse would absorb the capital and deploy it through 3 new fund vehicles, one of which would include infrastructure investment that provided the syndicate's legitimate operations with access to capital markets they had previously been unable to reach due to their proximity to the criminal infrastructure. The criminal infrastructure itself was not part of the agreement. Veth had no interest in it, and Vivian had no interest in it, and Damien, sitting in that room in the deep middle of the night, found that his interest in it had undergone a significant revision that he was not yet ready to examine fully, but could feel changing shape beneath everything else. At 5:17, Veth signed a preliminary term sheet. At 5:29, Vivian signed it. Damien signed it at 5:30, with the pen Veth offered him across the table, and the clock on the wall read exactly the time it read. And outside the curtained windows, the city was beginning its pre-dawn revision from night to something not yet morning, that specific gray that belongs exclusively to the hour before light. Veth stood and extended his hand. Damien shook it. Then Veth extended his hand to Vivian, and she shook it, and the handshake between them was the handshake of 2 people who have spent several hours determining that they respect each other's capabilities and are prepared to work with those capabilities without pretending the path to this room had been anything other than what it was. "The audio from the suite," Vivian said, not releasing his hand immediately. "Deleted," Veth said. "As of now. I'll need confirmation from your technical team. You'll have it by 9. She released his hand. "Then we're done for tonight." They left Veth in his room with his security team and his work table and his 3 screens, and Victor and his 2 men melted away in the corridor with the professional disappearance of people who were never officially present. And Damien and Vivian stood at the elevator bank in the Meridian Hotel at 5:33 in the morning and waited for a car to arrive, and neither of them said anything. The elevator opened. They got in. The doors closed. The car descended. In the lobby, through the plate glass windows, the city was doing its gray pre-dawn thing. A delivery truck was double parked on the avenue. A man in a reflective vest was doing something to a manhole cover with professional disinterest. 2 people who had been awake all night for entirely different reasons were walking east in the specific way of people whose bodies have passed through, tired, into the strange secondary alertness that lives on the other side of exhaustion. "You should eat something," she said. "It's 5:30 in the morning. There's a diner on 44th that opens at 5. Thomas Elgin used to take me there when we had early filings." She paused. "The eggs are fine. The coffee is better than it looks." He looked at her. She was looking at the plate glass window with the expression of someone who has been awake for 24 hours and is managing that fact with the same discipline she managed everything else. 1 strand of dark hair still loose near her left temple. The dark blue of the gown slightly different at 5:30 than it had been at 8:19. Still correct, still carriage, but wearing the evidence of the night it had been through. "All right," he said. They ate at a cornered table of a diner on 44th Street at 5:45 in the morning, and the eggs were fine, and the coffee was better than it looked, and they didn't talk about Veth, or the term sheet, or the Kastner acquisition, or the Aldridge call, or the frozen accounts, or any of the dozen operational realities that would require attention when the sun came up and the business world resumed its ordinary functioning. They talked about other things. Damien did not, afterward, Remember the specific content of what they talked about. Something about the diner's decor, something about a building on the corner that he had apparently passed 100 times without registering, something about the particular quality of the city at this hour, which was different from the quality of the city at any other hour in a way that neither of them had paid sufficient attention to. What he remembered was that she laughed once, the real one, the one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth, the one he had not made her do in longer than he could honestly calculate, at something he said about the coffee, something not particularly clever, a small observation about the cup's structural integrity relative to the temperature of its contents. And the laugh came and went, and she looked at him with the expression of someone deciding, in real time, how much weight to give a moment, and she gave it the weight of a moment, and not more than that. And it was enough. He drove to Connecticut alone. The car moved through the early morning with the specific quality of movement that belongs to roads before traffic. Fluid, effortless, the landscape scrolling past in the gray gold of a sun that was just beginning to negotiate with the horizon. He sat in the back and did not look at his phone, which was the first time he had not looked at his phone in a moving vehicle in approximately a decade, and the not looking had a physical sensation to it, like setting down a weight he'd forgotten he was carrying. He arrived at the Connecticut estate at 7:20. Thomas, the chef, was in the kitchen when Damien came through the door in his gala suit, looking the way a man looks when he has been through the kind of night that rearranges the load-bearing structures of his life. Thomas looked at him once and said nothing, which was the right call, and started the coffee, which was also the right call. Damien changed out of the charcoal suit and into clothes that were, for him, unusually plain. Dark trousers, a work shirt, a coat against the October morning. He stood in the kitchen drinking Thomas's coffee, which was better than the diner's and better than anything the penthouse produced, and he looked out the kitchen window at the greenhouse. He went out to it. The greenhouse in the early morning was a different place than it was at any other hour. The light came through the south-facing glass at an angle that made the climbing roses on their trellises look like something painted, layered, dimensional. The red of the blaze variety deepened by the low angle into something closer to burgundy. He stood in the door for a moment and breathed the air in, which was warm and green and carried the specific density of a space that has been carefully maintained over years, that has been given consistent attention and responded to that attention by becoming something beyond what any individual component, the plants, the humidity, the light, could have produced alone. He found the shears where she always kept them, on the second shelf of the work table near the door, clean and sharp because she kept everything clean and sharp. He found the garden gloves in the basket below. He spent 2 hours on the east wall climbing roses. He had watched her do this enough times to know the basic principle. Cut above the node, redirect the energy, take the dead growth clean so the plant doesn't waste itself maintaining what was already finished. He was not skilled at it. He cut too deep twice and had to adjust, and he missed a dead cane entirely on the third plant and had to go back. And his hands inside the gloves were not accustomed to this kind of work, and felt it. But he moved along the east wall in the morning light, and the work was specific enough to require his full attention, and the requiring of full attention was, he discovered, exactly what he needed. Not space to think, but an obligation not to. A task that filled the available cognitive space so completely that everything else had to wait outside. At 9:15, his phone went off. He checked it. Veth's technical team had sent the confirmation to Vivian. Audio deleted. The follow-up text from Adrian confirmed verification. He put the phone back in his coat pocket and went back to the roses. At 10:07, Forrest Elgin called to confirm that the voluntary disclosure documentation had been filed at 8:30 when the Federal Compliance Office opened. The accounts would begin the unfreezing process within 72 hours, subject to documentation review. The review was expected to close in 30 days. At 10:19, Marcus called. Damien answered. The morning press is running the Eclipse Dominion story, Marcus said. Identification of the chairman, the Kastner announcement. The biopieces they're significant. I know. There's going to be questions about your relationship to Eclipse, about handle the initial inquiries with no comment and refer them to the statement Elgin is drafting, nothing else until I'm back in the city. A pause. When will that be? I don't know yet. Another pause, during which Marcus performed the mental calculation of a chief aide, absorbing an answer that falls outside the operational parameters he's built his working life around. All right, Aunt, he said, with the specific inflection of a man who has decided to let something be what it is. The Hargrove withdrawal notice went out this morning. Hargrove's office called to confirm receipt. No hostility in the call. Good. Victor says to tell you the Wren organization is, his word was, adjusting. He didn't elaborate. He won't need to. He ended the call and looked at the east wall, which was about two-thirds done. The finished section had a different quality from the unfinished section. Cleaner lines, the live growth more visible against the trellis, without the dead wood competing for visual space. The plant looked, if that was the right word, lighter. Like something that had been carrying unnecessary weight and had been relieved of it without ceremony, just clean cuts in the right places. He worked until noon. He ate lunch in the kitchen. Thomas made him something without being asked. Something simple. Eggs and bread and fruit, the kind of food that a body running on 4 hours of sleep and a 5:30 diner required. And he sat at the kitchen counter where she stood every morning for her coffee, and he ate and looked out the window at the greenhouse and thought about the 4th year of their marriage. The dinner. The lamb. The thought experiment she had described with the animated precision of someone sharing something she cared about. He had asked for the salt. He sat with that for a while. He didn't try to convert it into anything useful. He let it be what it was, a specific verifiable failure with a specific verifiable cost. And he sat with it the way you sit with the evidence of your own limitations when you finally run out of the energy required to reframe it as something else. At 2 in the afternoon, his phone rang, her name on the screen. The confirmation came through, she said. I know, Adrian sent it. The disclosure filing, Elgin confirmed at 10. A pause. You've been busy. I've been tending roses. A longer pause. The east wall? 2/3 done. I'll finish tomorrow. She was quiet for a moment. He heard, in the background, the specific acoustic quality of her Eclipse office. She had described it once, early in their marriage, a converted townhouse in the East 50s with good windows and a conference room that looked onto a garden, and he had nodded and said something about passing the salt, metaphorically, and had never asked to see it. He was hearing it for the first time now through 3 inches of phone and 15 years of accumulated distance. The press is going to be significant, she said. I know. The syndicate's public-facing operation will need repositioning. The legitimate businesses, I know, Vivienne. I'm not trying to manage you. I know that too. Another pause. This one had a texture he recognized from the diner at 5:45. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people determining what, of all the things available to say, was the right thing for the moment. I haven't been to the estate in 3 weeks, she said. I know. I could come this weekend. He looked out the kitchen window at the greenhouse, at the south-facing glass with the afternoon light coming through it, at the angle that made the light look like a choice rather than a condition. The east wall will be finished by then, he said. You can tell me what I did wrong. You cut too deep on the blaze variety. You always would. You're not patient enough with things that have thorns. He absorbed that. I'll work on it. I know you will, she said, and the way she said it was not warm exactly, and not cold. It was the way you say something when you've decided to mean it without performing the meaning, when you're tired of performing, and the genuine thing is what's left. I have calls until 7. I'll text you about the weekend. All right. Damien. Yes. The east wall has a section near the second post where the support wire is loose. The plant's been compensating on its own, but it'll need the wire reset before the frost or the cane will break. He looked out the window, though he couldn't see the second post from the kitchen. I'll find it. It's the 3rd horizontal wire from the ground. You'll see where the tension's gone. I'll fix it, he said. She ended the call. He sat for a while longer at the kitchen counter. Thomas moved around him with the acquired expertise of someone who has long since learned to work around the presences that occupy a kitchen without being fully in it. The afternoon light moved across the floor in the slow way. Afternoon light moves in October with the particular quality of a light that knows it's on borrowed time. In the weeks that followed, the story came out in pieces, the way significant stories always come out. Not in one clean revelation, but in layers, each layer revealing a new dimension of what had been there all along. The financial press devoted significant coverage to the identification of Eclipse Dominion's chairman. The profiles that emerged were, uniformly, The kind of profiles that get written about people who have done something so consequential for so long in such complete obscurity that the revelation of it carries the specific charge of a thing whose scale nobody had accurately estimated. The word brilliant appeared in 17 separate publications. The word extraordinary appeared in 23. None of them had a word for the specific quality she had that was not brilliance or extraordinariness, but something quieter and more durable. The quality of someone who had decided what she was building and built it without asking the room's permission. The Moreau Syndicate's public restructuring was announced 6 weeks after the gala, in a press release that Elgin drafted and Damien approved after 3 revisions. The legitimate operations were formally separated into an independent holding company. The criminal infrastructure, the parts of it that could not be legitimized, the operational machinery that had functioned in darkness for 30 years, began a managed contraction, not an implosion. A controlled reduction, the kind that preserved the legitimate employment and the legitimate relationships and wound down the rest with the minimum disruption that minimum disruption allowed. Damien managed it personally. He had built it personally, and he owed it that. Victor Wren called him during the 3rd week of the restructuring and said, "You're actually doing it," with the tone of a man who had expected to be proven wrong and was conducting an honest accounting of having been proven right instead. "Yes," Damien said. "It'll cost you." "I know. The Hargrove relationship, the Serbian connection, I know what it'll cost, Victor." A pause. "You're not who I thought you were," Victor said. Not as an accusation, as the kind of statement that emerges when someone has updated a long-held assessment and is reporting the update honestly. "I'm not sure I was either," Damien said. Senator Aldridge survived the voluntary disclosure process, as predicted, with his political career intact and a PAC restructuring that his chief of staff characterized publicly as routine administrative maintenance. He called Damien once, in the 4th week, to say something that he appeared to have rehearsed, and which landed as both genuine and insufficient, the way apologies land when they're real but smaller than what they're trying to address. Damien accepted it and moved on. Aldridge was not the point. The Veth partnership closed in 63 days. The Eclipse co-investment vehicle was announced to the financial press as a strategic capital partnership between Eclipse Dominion and Meridian Capital Asia, the name under which Veth's Singapore fund would operate in Western markets. The announcement was covered extensively. Solomon Veith gave a single interview in which he described Eclipse's chairman as someone who changed the way he thought about the relationship between patience and power. Vivienne did not give interviews. She had never given interviews. She sent Veth a handwritten note that said, "In full. Good interview. The last line was accurate. VM." Damien read about the note in a profile piece in the Financial Times and sat with a complicated mix of something that was not quite pride and not quite grief, and not quite either of those things, but occupied the same region of the interior landscape, that territory where 2 feelings are so close together they share a border. She came to the estate on a Saturday in late November. He had the east wall finished. The loose support wire on the 2nd post had been reset. He'd found it where she said it would be, the tension gone, the plant growing in the compensated shape of something that had been supporting itself for too long. He'd reset the wire and repositioned 2 canes, and the plant had taken the correction in the way plants take correction, not gratefully exactly, but with the silent, functional efficiency of a living thing that has been given what it needed and redirected its energy accordingly. She came in through the kitchen door in the mid-afternoon in the garden clothes she wore at the estate, dark trousers, a simple shirt, her hair down, which she rarely wore down anywhere except here. She set her bag on the counter and looked out the window at the greenhouse and then at him. "How's the wall?" she said. "Come see." They walked out together in the November cold, side by side at the pace that people establish after enough years of walking beside each other that the pace is its own kind of language. The rose canes were bare now, the frost having come in the 2nd week of November, with the decisive authority of a season that doesn't negotiate. Against the bare canes, the trellis structure was clearly visible, and the work he'd done on the east wall was visible in the clean geometry of the support wires and the clear delineation between the living canes and the stripped dead wood. She walked the walls slowly, examining it with the particular attention of someone who has tended a thing for a long time and is reading its history in its current state. She paused at the 2nd post. She crouched slightly and looked at the reset wire. Her fingers went to where the tension had been restored, testing it with a practiced pull that he recognized as the same gesture she'd used 100 times without him ever having registered it as a gesture of expertise. "Good," she said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised." She stood. "I told you you'd find it." He looked at the wall. In the gray November light, without the roses, it looked like scaffolding, the support structure of something not yet there but anticipated, built in advance of the thing it would hold. "Will they come back?" he said. "In the spring." "They come back every spring," she said. "They're stubborn things. Cut them down to nothing and they'll still put out new growth when the temperature comes up." "It's what they do." He nodded. She moved along the wall to the final section, and he moved with her, and they walked the length of it in the silence that had replaced, slowly, imperfectly, without ceremony, the other kind of silence, the one that had accumulated between them for years in the same rooms, at the same tables, in the same house, two people each going further into their separate projects without noticing the distance accumulating. At the end of the wall, she stopped and looked back the length of it. "You did good work," she said. "Don't make it bigger than it is." "I'm not." She looked at him. "It's a wall of roses. You tended it carefully. That's what it is." She paused. "It's enough." The afternoon light was the low, slanted November kind, coming over the tree line at the edge of the estate property and throwing long shadows across the grass and the greenhouse glass. She turned her face slightly toward it, not a conscious gesture, just the body's reflex toward warmth. And for a moment she looked exactly like the woman from the 4th year, from the dinner, from the thought experiment he'd been too absent to hear. She looked like continuity, like the proof that a person, if they are genuinely themselves, remains themselves through everything, through being ignored, and through rising, and through the long night of being both seen and not seen, and choosing, finally, how to be seen on their own terms. She turned back to the estate and started walking toward the kitchen door. He fell in beside her. Their pace matched without negotiation. "Adrian is sending the VETH 60-day documentation Monday," she said. "I'll need to be in Singapore in February for the fund vehicle launch." "I know, Elgin mentioned it." "The syndicate restructuring, the timeline on the Serbian wind down. 45 days, Forrest has the documents. And the Hargrove—" "Done," he said. "It's done." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. They reached the kitchen door. She pushed it open and the warmth of the kitchen came out to meet them. Thomas's kitchen in the late afternoon, with whatever it was that Thomas was doing at the stove producing a smell that belonged to the particular domestic category of things that are simply good without requiring analysis. She stopped in the doorway and looked back once at the greenhouse, at the east wall barely visible in the fading afternoon light, the bare canes on their clean supports standing against the gray sky. "Next spring," she said, not really to him, more to the general fact of it, "there'll be something." "Yes," he said. She went inside. He stood in the doorway for another moment, looking at the wall in the fading light, at the structure he had spent 2 days building back into correctness, at the bare canes that held inside them, in whatever way living things hold what they require to become themselves, every rose that the season would eventually demand they produce. He had not saved his empire. He had not won the acquisition. He had not outmaneuvered anyone or constructed a counter-narrative or managed the outcome toward a version of events that centered his logic and his necessity. What he had done was see her. Finally, clearly, at a cost that had been exact and that he had paid without negotiation, because it was the right price and he had owed it, and the only honest thing left was to pay it. He went inside. The kitchen door closed behind him with the quiet, solid sound of a well-made thing. And the east wall stood in the early November dark, bare and supported and waiting, with the patience of things that have already survived everything necessary and know that the season, in its time, will come around again.